Welcome to the Real Resiliency podcast by TLCVR, where we discuss real resiliency journeys from people like you. Here are your hosts, Dr. Robert Goldman, Dr. Paul Meller, Dr. Webb Garrison.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Real Resiliency. Today is an absolutely gorgeous spring day and our first podcast of this spring. Also a very, very special day. Today we have Ken Burkert with us, who is going to take us through his path to resiliency, and very different from some of the other guests we've heard from. We all know how difficult and stressful being a first responder is, and especially a police officer. And Ken's going to talk with us all about his experience as a police officer, his road to resiliency, and even more important, his path to helping other police officers find wellness in the face of all of the stress. So I want to thank Ken very much for being here and pass it right on to my colleague, Dr. Robert Goldman.
Thank you, Paul. Hey, Ken, thank you very much for joining us today. As Paul said, we're so appreciative that you could come today and join us on this podcast. The topic we're talking about is resiliency, but your story is really special and it needs to be told and it needs to be shared so that it can inspire others who may be going through similar difficulties. So thank you for being here. Ken, I want to start with really the end, the sort of the beginning to the point where you are today. And what is it that really inspired you to be where you are now, but at that time was a major hurdle for you to overcome?
Well, it actually started when a dear friend of mine took his life. His name was Rudy Zurich. And it was in 2008, I believe. I was already on the job 18 years. But Rudy was a dear friend of mine. He was a military police officer in the Air Force. He had gotten out. He was a national powerlifting champion. And when he came to the jail, I was already there. So I became a field training officer and kind of took Rudy under my wing. We became very close and he was very diligent at his job. However, 2 inmates escaped when Rudy was working on his tour. It wasn't Rudy's fault. It was actually 2 weeks worth of officers that, obviously were not checking on these 2 prisoners who ended up escaping on Rudy's tour. But it became a media sensation where everyone, ABC, NBC, you name the news, and they were involved with this case. I was a union delegate and a representative for my local, and also I was on the state executive board, which is comprised of 33,000 PBA members. So I was involved with my local, which was close to 300 officers, as well as on the executive board of the entire New Jersey State PBA. So I received a phone call saying that Rudy needed to see me and he wasn't doing well. I was driving actually to a party with my wife, Renee. And I told my wife I had to, I had to go to the jail. So I went to the jail. I saw Rudy and he didn't look well at all, of course. I pulled him aside and I asked him, I said, Rudy, what happened here? So I wanted to make sure that, he didn't do anything wrong. So he looked at me and he says, Ken, I left my post and I went to grab a coffee and cigarettes. I came back and during feeding, our trustee, the person who was feeding the prisoners, told me that there was 2 prisoners who weren't there. But I didn't do anything wrong. I just, I don't know how this happened. So I said, okay, that's good to know. So I said, listen, this isn't a good situation. And he was looking through me when he was talking. I said, I'm going to get you out of here and get you at least to the hospital, because we had this language where if there was a traumatic event in the workplace, we could at least have time for the officer to collect his thoughts instead of immediately reporting the incident. So I was able to ask an assistant director who was there if I could take Rudy to the hospital based on just looking at him and knowing he wasn't well. Took him to the hospital and actually also called our attorney who came to see him just so there was an attorney available for him. And he was basically given medication and sent home. During that time, within 3 days, it became national media and news. And basically, the media was putting it out there that Officer Zurich helped these prisoners, because the prisoners left behind a note with a smiley face saying, "Thanks, Officer Zurich, for the tools needed to escape." Well, Rudy took that to heart, was absolutely devastated that the media was depicting him as being this person involved with these prisoners escaping. So during that time, I hired an attorney for him, and I was having very intimate conversations with him. I worked, I believe it was January 1st, which was New Year's Day. And I saw Rudy when I was leaving. I worked a 8 to 4. Rudy was coming for a 4 to 12. I saw Rudy come in, and I just looked at him and I said, "What's up, Rudy?" And he just nodded at me and walked by me. I told him to call me that night because I wanted to check on him. He did, in fact, call me that night. I said, "Rudy, listen, if things go bad with your job, I already have a job lined up for you." So I was able to make phone calls and have a job where he was going to be able to sell cars. Because I wanted him to at least be at ease with what was coming on the media, knowing that there would be suspensions, including other officers. And he was set to meet with the attorney. His name was Mike Mitzner, to meet with him. The next day, I go to work and I receive a phone call from a friend of mine who worked for the prosecutor's office. He says, "Ken, where are you?" I said, "I'm going into my office." He says, "You need to sit down." I said, "I'm not sitting down. What's going on?" And he said, "Rudolph killed himself." And I remember sitting in my chair, turning it around, and just crying as hard as I've ever cried in my life, with anguish. Now, what I didn't tell you is, after I talked to Rudy that day, I did call a fellow colleague, and I mentioned to my colleague, I said, "You know what? I saw Rudy today, and the look that he gave me, I think he's going to kill himself." So after receiving that call, it was in my head on, why didn't I just ask him what I saw by seeing this in his face? So that part of my crying and being upset was the what if that was going off in my head on, what if I just asked him, could I have been able to do more? Well, I received a phone call from his attorney, Mike Mitzner, who says, "Ken, the media is now coming to my office and you need to speak for Rudy because you're the only one who could speak for him because you know he did nothing wrong." So I remember having my wife drive me, and I went to the office in Watchung, and all the news reporters were there, and I spoke for Rudy because I had to at least let people know what Rudy was about. And I remember speaking I was hurt, but I was very calm. And I said to the newscasters, I think it was Channel 7, Channel 4, I said, "Rudy wears uniform better than anybody. Rudy did his job. Rudy was a family man. He loved his wife and his child. And he absolutely unequivocally had nothing to do with this escape. This escape was a systematic, dysfunctional breakdown. And he had nothing to do with it." Well, shortly thereafter, our prosecutor, stated something in the paper where Rudy had nothing to do with this, which at least helped me, knowing that I was able to speak for Rudy.
And how did that change your life, change your trajectory as to where you are now?
Well, after that, I felt like I needed to become more involved and more proactive on what I felt that if I did something differently on asking him that question, that there could have been a different outcome. So to be very transparent with you, during that time, I was already dealing with stressors with raising a family. I had a wife and 3 children. That event triggered my own mental health issues where I ended up with a anxiety disorder. And I had to see a therapist to talk about everything that I had to get out. And I also had to take medication because I could not sleep at night. I couldn't shut down. But during that time, I was still in work mode, dad mode, still taking care of everyone with my local. And I basically went to our state PBA president. His name is Tony Wieners, who I give all the credit to, because without him and his influence, I would never be doing what I'm doing. I went to Tony, our state president, and I said, we need to do more. And he says, okay, we will do more. I want you to make sure that you take care of yourself and you continue to talk to somebody. And then he called me 2 weeks later and he says, listen, I made some phone calls politically, of course, and he was able to have me appointed to the suicide task force as a spokesperson for the organization. Long short, I went to the meetings with other union leaders, and we were able to effectuate some change with modifications with the task force where the Attorney General was involved and Milgram. And we put together some ideas, and we picked actually cop to cop as the best practice. They're retired officers where they take phone calls with confidentiality. And we, started building on making things better with, you don't just train someone when they're in the academy, you have to train them while they're at work. And burnout usually occurs 7 to 10 years on the job. So we made modifications with implementing more training on the job during your training period. To break that down with law enforcement officers, you have to go for training for firearms. You have to go for training for CPR, but there was never training on mental health awareness or suicide awareness. So in my particular facility where I worked and in Union County, I went to my director and I asked that we implement this immediately. And he agreed. He says, well, you're the union head, so as long as you're not going to argue with it. I said, I'm not going to argue with it, and my membership will be fine with it because of what just happened. And then I actually went to the Union County prosecutor. His name was Ted Romenko, and I brought it to him with the director of the hotline. Her name was Cherie Castellana. And we had a meeting, and he actually agreed for us to train all of Union County on whoever wanted to come and be trained. So he was actually very instrumental in opening it up and sending it out to all the police chiefs on something that he felt would be a necessity. So what I was doing was basically being proactive immediately on trying to effectuate change. I then was appointed the peer chairman for the organization in New Jersey State PBA. And at that time, I brought on Cherie Castellano, who already ran the hotlines, as one of my clinical people. Dr. Stefanelli was immediately hired as a doctor who was then going to see members where the PBA was going to pay for that. And that's still actually in effect. And Dr. Michael Bozzaro became a volunteer. So I had 3 clinical people and myself, and we basically vetted and built this peer support group with different peers geographically. And we would have meetings on a monthly basis and basically work with any scenarios that happened within their geographic location. And we became really effective at doing such. I was on call and I volunteered my time to do that. And so when you ask the question, what did I do? I just basically continued to go for help myself. And the empathy was easy when someone called, because it was easy when I received a call when someone was dealing with something, because I could just be honest with them on my own stuff that I dealt with. And we basically built that team to where if officers needed assistance, we would send and refer, because it was a question, persuade, refer to whatever was best for that member. Either it be a general practitioner, a licensed social worker, a PhD, and or a facility of what was best for them.
So can you tell us, is that what Brothers Keepers are? Or tell us a little bit about that. Is that how that came to be?
Well, that the Brothers Keeper piece came where it actually, I named it Brothers Keeper, and actually I have a tattoo that I got a few years ago. The Brothers Keeper was something that I just brought out because it was a brother's keeper model with great clinical doctors who were able to actually help me, including Cherie, who worked the hotlines, help me help other peers by dealing with case analysis. When an officer would call, say, if they had a domestic violence or they had a drinking issue, or they were dealing with a work-related issue, we were able to work collectively on helping these officers out on a case-by-case geographic situation. And we just basically built off of that with our team. We had like 20 peers that work collectively. And then what we decided to do is start trainings when I was still involved with the organization, where we were trained quarterly. And I had a panel with myself, and we would train other delegates from, different geographic locations and have trainings on a quarterly basis. So the Brothers Keeper model was built on what I just told you, on building it off of the tragedy of losing my friend Rudy.
How were you able to do all of this? And you were a correction officer at that time, right? So how did you do all of this at the same time?
I was able to do it because it's a good question. I guess from the pain of what happened, I found the time to do it. I was able to get release time when I needed to, meaning at work, to go and work and do this work. So I had time with that, but it became a full-time position on doing that and also representing the local with contract negotiations, disciplinary hearings, etc. It was just something that I put into my mind on, I'm going to make this right, because not only did my friend kill himself, but I was suffering myself. And if he would have been able to speak to a doctor, maybe get medicated, maybe stop the noise in his head, he'd still be alive today. So it was basically just my structure on how I was raised, on not giving up and continuing to try to become better as a person through my own pain and mental health issue, and just continuing to work with others. Because the more I spoke about it, Rob, on the microphone when I was there as a peer, the more people talked to me if I was walking to the bathroom or leaving the bathroom, or they would call me after the meeting. And they were like, Ken, thank you so much for sharing, because I'm dealing with X, Y, and Z also. And it just became, it really just ignited to it being okay not to be okay.
So Ken, I'm curious. You have now all these years past that, and you've gained a huge amount of experience and a wealth of knowledge in how to manage these kinds of situations better. And I'm wondering if you were able to take everything that you've gathered over these years and give it to yourself way back when your friend was in trouble, and maybe even just put yourself in the position of a current CO or PO that's trying to really reach out and help, a peer or a colleague, what would you give them? What would you want them to do now based upon all that you've learned, so that maybe they can be a good first line of defense against this happening again?
Well, that's a great question, because so I volunteered for 7 years, and then I retired after 25 years of service, and I was immediately hired to work with actually Dr. Michael Bizzaro, who was a former Port Authority cop, to work with him at Princeton Behavioral Health, who has become Penn Med. Where I work, it's a short acute facility, primary psych, secondary substance. So I've seen not only the peer advocacy side when I volunteered doing that for 7 years, but now, we're actually 8 years I volunteered, but now I'm working in this field where I'm able to sit with, dual certified psychiatrists and APNs and social workers. And I'm able to see officers that are there with me, where I could spend time and see the whole clinical side of what really was going on that I didn't understand as a peer. Because the only thing I understood as a peer, I understood their rights, meaning what they could do with the American Disabilities Act, the Family Medical Leave Act. I really didn't understand the clinical perspective of what I've gained post-retirement. So that question now I can answer in certainty because I've seen the peer side. Now I've seen officers, correctional officers, police officers, firefighters, military, close to 1,600 individuals who are in the first responder category. What I could tell you now from sitting and seeing people at their worst, meaning to where they possibly want to kill themselves or they want to kill themselves, or they're dealing with a co-occurring disorder, alcohol, pain meds, depression, anxiety, bipolarities. What I can say is if more officers knew that it's okay to ask for help and receive that help and follow a full continuum of care, and I'll explain what that is to me and how I explain it to the officers who come if I ever interact with them, either over the phone or I meet them. I tell them that I've not only lost one, I lost two friends because I lost a colleague 18 months later who walked out, his name was Frank Conjusta, walked out of the jail, wrote a note, mentioned my name, and then at lunchtime took a firearm and killed himself outside of the correctional facility I work in. And I was actually on vacation down the shore, and I came back and met Cherie Castellano and had a priest, and we were on the scene for that to do the right thing for him 18 months later. So, I felt it. I have felt the pain of losing officers and being, because I went to Rudy's house as well. What I can say would help officers is this. A, if more officers were medicated when they were involved with an episode of depression, anxiety, PTSD, any of the above, or even substance abuse issues, if they were able to be medicated in that acute place that they're involved with, more officers would be alive today. I can say that because I've seen it working from a peer and learning the clinical side, because I have seen firefighters, police officers, correctional officers, military, etc., go from being to where they didn't want to come in because they were afraid to, and me on the phone with them explaining to them, listen, John Doe, it's okay that you're not okay, but I have been a peer and I work inside of a hospital. I will guarantee you an opportunity for an opportunity if you just listen to me. And I will never bullshit you. I'm a straight shooter. So whatever you hear from me, I'm telling you the truth. If somebody's dealing with a substance abuse issue, a mental health issue, and or both, if you just receive the help you need and follow a true continuum of care, meaning you, if necessary, because it would have to be a clinical assessment done, but if they come in for help and then follow the set of directions that they're given from the peer doctor perspective, I've seen it. I've seen it to where they call me. They send me texts. Kenny, thank you so much. You changed my life. Kenny, thank you so much. Everything you said has come true. And there's been cases where people have come through, but they went through the motions because they just did it because they had to, because their ass was on fire, meaning they were in trouble and their employer told them, you have to go get help. Those individuals, what happens a lot of the time is they go through the motions and they don't really do it with the right intent. They're lucky if they're a repeat offender, because some of them have died. Some of them have killed themselves. Some of them have lost their jobs. And I've seen it working in the field at the hospital now. So I've seen it on both ends.
I've got a quick question. I'm curious because two of the themes that I hear in what you're talking about are how important relationships are and how important vulnerability is. And I'm curious about how your experience or how your view of both of those things, vulnerability and relationships, has changed, kind of as you've gone through this personal transformation and shared this so broadly with others.
So repeat the question.
Sure. I'm curious about how your understanding, how your experience of on the one hand, vulnerability and dealing with vulnerability, and on the other hand, relationships, kind of the importance of relationships. I guess I'm curious about how that, your view of that has changed, and your experience of that has changed in what you've experienced.
What I say to the people I meet or I talk to on the phone, because a lot of times it's just on the phone. But I'm very passionate about what I do, and I guess passion has been something that's been ingrained in me since being a young child. I'm just honest, and I tell the person that, listen, I've been there. I know what you're feeling, and I open up about my own vulnerabilities. Okay, and I explain to them, listen, I was a captain of my football team, captain of the wrestling team. I was a very physical person, back in the day, and still could be today. Defensive tactics instructor, trained with the FBI and method of instruction. I tell them the truth about who I was and who I am. And I do that to open up on, I don't care how tough you think you are. When I felt that emotional pain of being depressed, feeling anxious, not being able to shut down from a physicality piece, you can only fight so hard before you have to surrender and work with a plan. So the surrendering is something that we don't like to hear, being first responders. We don't even understand that word, surrender or give up. So the way I bring it to them is this is when you surrender, you win. Because you're actually changing your thought process on surrendering wins this. And I know it's hard for you to comprehend that, but I can tell you, it took for me to surrender to shutting off the noise in my head for me to be proactive on winning the day. Because every day is a reset. Every day is a reset on being proactive, because you could wake up feeling really shitty, and you either have to shut that off and reset, because you may feel really bad the whole day, but tomorrow's another day. So it's taking small incremental steps on your well-being. And that's what I say, and that's what I use for myself.
Ken, were you like this before you lost your friend? I mean, were the things that we talk about occupational mindset hazards, right? Things that are required of you to adapt in the working in the jail are not necessarily adaptive in real life. Like, you can't be vulnerable. You talked about your experience even in football, in the military, showing emotion, things like that, stigmatizing yourself if you admit to any type of vulnerability, such as mental health. Were you of that mindset before you lost your friend, or did this open up your eyes?
So I was raised from a very strict Irish Catholic father. I had two older brothers, two sisters. I had a beautiful, wonderful Italian mother who was very loving. So I guess my upbringing was kind of like shake it off. We didn't cry much as kids growing up in my family. So, we were raised from a really strict father. So I guess my upbringing and the structure that I had from a young child was kind of like when my father went to work on the weekends, he woke us up and we had work details to do because he was going to work to feed our family. So he felt on the weekends, we had to be up to do work details outside the house because he wanted us to be productive, as with this team concept of being productive even back when I was younger. So I guess I was kind of structured from a young age to not have time to ever really feel sorry about anything, to be quite honest. So sports was something that helped me grow as a child. And I guess going to work as a correction officer, I was always about team building. So for me, it was always about trying to always help other people anyway, from a young age, being involved with a team. And my sons, as you know, when I found out we were having twins, I bought wrestling shoes for my boys, and I had a plan in my head on, okay, I have a beautiful daughter. She really wasn't into sports as much as my sons. My daughter now just graduated with an MSW. She's getting ready to take her LSW, and she's going to get her LCSW, and she's going to go back and get her PhD. So she was into the books, and my wife was more into the books with my daughter. I was more into the sports with my sons. They became really great high school wrestlers. They were recruited to go to a great private school and did really well at a preparatory school and received scholarships because of the structure that kind of I brought to them from a young age. So I guess the resiliency was from a young age, and I just implemented that into my life with a team concept with my entire family. And thank God my wife bought into that. And when I was going through my most vulnerable times, I had to open up to my wife about how I was feeling, because I didn't have, besides the doctor, I really didn't like talking about it too much, except when I wanted to help people. And when I had that opportunity, even though I was still feeling vulnerable, I felt there was a necessity to bring it out and talk about it, to get other people to buy into my vulnerability. But I still felt that I was helping, because I knew by listening to other people say, thank you, Ken, I was actually still being productive and proactive.
I totally get that.
That makes sense?
Yeah.
So Ken, you went through just an incredible series of stressors and traumatic situations, both that you experienced yourself directly, but that you experienced through other people's eyes, your friends, families. And so you have this stress, and then you have this kind of secondary trauma laid on top of that, of experiencing all of this through those other people's eyes. And you talked about having this strength that came out of structure, that came from your family. You talked about strength that comes from your family and connection, and clearly the connection that you have to your wife and your children brings you a tremendous amount of strength. As you're going through these really stressful situations, you're still at this very, very critical point where you could collapse and fall apart, or you can be resilient and push through it. What were the pieces that you found either within yourself or with the people around you that kept you from collapsing and actually made you grow from these very, very difficult situations?
That's a great question. My spirituality, my wife, my father forced us to go to church. So it started at home with having a higher power. But when I met my wife, she was very much into her religion, and we're Catholic. So when we were married, we took our children to church. No matter what, we took our children. If I worked a Sunday, we went to church on Saturday. No matter what, we were together always as a family, and spirituality was a very, very important part of my life. So when I was going through my difficult time, I also went and saw my priest. His name was Father Burke. Not only was I seeing a psychologist, I was going and talking to my priest, because I felt like my world was falling apart. And I was articulating on how vulnerable I was and how hard it was. And I remember him saying to me, he looked at me and he says, "What makes you Jesus Christ?" And I was like, "What?" And he kind of gave me like a slap of reality on, why do you need to be so perfect? Why can't you just realize that we all deal with things? We deal with depression. We deal with vulnerabilities. Everyone has their own vulnerabilities, and it's okay to feel this way. And it's okay. So he almost like opened my eyes to stop trying so hard to do everything right all the time, and allow this pain and allow this to be okay. Jesus suffered. Ken, it's okay for you to suffer. You need to realize that you're not going to be able to control this on your own, and you need to continue to go see your doctor. You could come here anytime. But him giving me that, what makes you think you need to be so perfect? Because of the way I was raised in the structure, my spiritual advisor giving me a kind of like a smack woke me up to him saying to me, "Ken, you don't think I'm vulnerable? You don't think I have my own stuff I deal with? It's okay." So it was reassuring me on feeling that way was okay. Because I was looking for anything to be coached. I was always very coachable on when my coach told me to do this way, I did it. And then I would do it when nobody was around. I did it even more because I wanted to be better at it.
And unfortunately, there's no handbook to deal with this, but you kind of wrote your own story, right? And you found meaning behind your suffering, and you transcended the tragedy, and you continue to live on the memory of Rudy by doing such great things. And your story is more than just a story of resiliency. It's a story of post-traumatic growth. It really is. And Ken, you're continuing to share that your story with so many people is what makes this world such a better place. So the world's lucky to have people like you, Ken.
I really appreciate it. And I'll tell you that if I didn't get that help, and if I didn't open up to my wife, I remember I was laying in bed and my wife, I didn't like to ever have to open up about being vulnerable, because when I was at work, I would come home. I remember I would always take my uniform off. I didn't want my kids to have to touch me, because I felt like the germs and everything I dealt with there, I didn't want them to be a part of. But when I was in my bad place, I had to open up to my wife and tell her the truth. And it was the first time, even in my marriage, that I opened up to her with feeling less than being a man, if that makes any sense, because I was always that person that took the charge and took the lead. And she said, she gave me permission. She's like, Ken, it's okay. I'm here for you. We're going to be okay. No matter what, we're going to be okay. And I remember staying in bed one day longer than I would stay in bed. And she came into the room, she opened the door, and she's like, you need to get up now, and you need to go, and you need to take the kids out. And I was depressed. And I was like, Renee, I'm not feeling it today. And she's like, Ken, you need to do that. And it was like my father in my head saying, Ken, shake it off. I needed her to do that, so me opening up to my wife on my vulnerability at that point in my life, she was my crutch also. Not just that I was taking medication and I was seeing somebody, but she became the stronger person in the relationship for a few years. And I leaned on her, which is very difficult for our group to do, because I hear them when they talk on the phone. And I bring that up as it's okay to ask for help, even from your significant other, because it actually empowered me more to feel less vulnerable and not feel like the man of the house, because it gave me permission. And it actually, it strengthened our marriage, because then I became back to being Ken again. And, to this day, I still thank her. I'm like, you know what? I really needed you at that point in my life. And there was a lot that happened in my career where officers early in my career, use excessive force and ended up going to jail. This was only in my 4th or 5th year on the job. And I remember coming home even then and saying to my wife, Renee, if I was there, I'd probably be going to jail with them, because at that point, at that part of our career, if inmates were acting out and doing something wrong, we would use the force necessary, sometimes more, because we were trained that way. So I had to, even at that point in my life, change and be coached to do the right thing. How did that happen? Because then the facility enforced rules and regulations and trained us the right way to make sure the wrong didn't happen. And I've noticed that in law enforcement. Usually they wait till something happens and then they train you, instead of really working on being proactive on everything, on the what ifs, on how to handle it proactively the right way. Because once I got trained on what I can do with the use of force, being on the SWAT team, there'd be no one better, because I was coached on, this is how you write a report. When something happens, you handle it this way. I became really, really effective at not worrying about being investigated by an IA officer, when I knew my job, because you know what happened? I read the use of force, and I ended up not only knowing the use of force, I helped change some of the policies on the use of force during my career, because I wanted to get better at it, and I wanted to help out my colleagues so they could be better at doing their jobs, so they didn't go to jail. So it was always on that team concept on let's help each other get better. And
But
again,
that-
it was being coached.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but one of the things that strikes me is that, you know, with the organization that you started, Brothers Keepers, right? Is that the name? Or
It's
sorry.
not an organization. I
You call
it
it that.
Keeper model. Yeah.
Got
It's
it.
just
Fine.
brother-
So that was so that model, you know, that model and being able to, you know, kind of share that model with all of the people that you work with. One of the things that strikes me is the ripple effect that goes out not only to the immediate community of officers, but actually to the population that y'all serve. You know, I think that one of the things, you know, obviously there have been vivid things that have happened in our culture, you know, where excessive force has been used, and there have been times that clearly, you know, some people have not been in their not had their full faculties. They've been mentally compromised, you know, under some of those circumstances. So, you know, one of the things that I imagine is that just in the contact that you have with others, there's almost this implicit gain to the community, that there's a recognition, you know, that in our jobs, we also need to, you know, kind of be attuned to other people's vulnerabilities, to really, you know, to serve our communities to the best way possible. So that's just something that I wanted to kind of observe. It's very powerful what you're doing. Very, very powerful.
Well, it's changing. You know, when I came in as a correctional officer when I was 20 years old, it was a different time in 1990 with corrections, right? There was like the key and the bars, and you know, these inmates were really, really violent inmates. And the old school jailers, they didn't take any stuff. You acted up and you get a fresh year across your face and get thrown in a cell. So when I came in, I was a young kid out of high school, you know, loved contact sports, loved being physical. It was kind of easy when someone stepped to me to be able to just do whatever I needed to do and protect myself. However, through the years, something really bad happened in my facility where these immigrants came from a private facility where they wrecked it, and they came into our facility, and, you know, they were screaming, you know, F America, screw you. And these officers, you know, some of them used excessive force because a lot of them were trained that way also, and ended up going to jail. And I could tell you, if I was there that day, I would have been one of the officers probably who would have gotten in trouble. So I went into like not only a scared straight program from an early start. I was only 25 and already had a family. At 27, already had 3 children. I had to change it even then I had to change my mindset to become a better person, know that the stuff that was going on wasn't right, but at the time it was right because it was allowed. And again, if it wasn't for the coaching, the training, me being coachable, because I didn't want to end up losing my job and having my family not have a lifestyle we had, you know, I didn't want to fail my family. So I had to change a lot about not only who I was with my behavior. First of all, I believe it was a call from a higher power, because I didn't think I'd ever be the person to be working, helping officers with mental health and co-occurring disorders. You know, I thought I'd be, running some training facility, maybe having a security team and doing high executive security work. That was something that I thought I'd be doing once I retired. But I believe this was a calling, and me feeling so vulnerable and so hurt, I felt if I felt that way, how are other people feeling? When I was actually a leader of my football team and my wrestling team, what happened to the individuals that maybe weren't even participating on any type of team? And so I almost felt like it was a calling that I had to help others, because if I felt so bad about where I was, how did everyone else feel? So my empathy on helping others was a calling where I felt like I have to do this. I have to, because it doesn't matter if you played a team sport to me. What matters is how could I get you to at least for you to feel like it's okay to, even if you didn't play a team sport, but for you to feel like it's okay not feeling okay, but knowing that you can be coached to be on our team together, and we can become brothers and unify together to help others.
Well, Ken, again, I want to thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story with us. No doubt it will be someone else's survival guide. And just again, grateful to have you today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Ken, I
Thank
just
you,
wanted
Ken.
to share with you that your story is inspiring. The fact that you dedicated the first chapter in your life in working with people in one way, and then pivoted in another way based upon your own growth, on your own experiences, your own vulnerabilities. And as Rob talked about, that post-traumatic growth is a great tribute and testament to you. And I just wanted to acknowledge that and say that the light in me sees, acknowledges, and truly honors the light in you. And I thank you for shedding that light on the 1,600 families and people that you've worked with and continue to work with. Namaste.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.